Hi, everybody. My name is David Shivitz, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the seventh and final installment of our joint speaker series, which aims to bring broader and often neglected context essential to understanding Israel and Palestine historically and in the present. As organizers, we'd like to express how happy we are that so many people have joined us week after week this quarter. It's really gratifying to be part of a community that's committed to deepening its knowledge and exploring contested topics. So thank you very much to all. Videos of all of our past lectures are or will soon be available on the Buffett website and YouTube channel. In these previous lectures, we followed a journey from Ottoman Palestine to World War I and the creation of the British Mandate. We learned about the development of both Zionism and Palestinian nationalism. We also learned about the events of the 1948 war and began a two-part conversation about its legacy. Last week, Dr. Lina Delasha walked us through the first part of that conversation on post-1948 transformations by surveying the Palestinian Nakba and its impact on Palestinian identity, both among Palestinians living within the boundaries of the nascent state of Israel and among those beyond its boundaries.
Hi, my name is Wendy Coleman. I'm the interim director of the Middle East and North Africa Studies program. So from there, today, our very own colleague and co-organizer of this entire series, so who's really done double, triple, quadruple time, Maayan Hilel launches a second examination of post-1948 transformations through a consideration of Jews from the Arab world and their experiences before and after Israeli statehood. Professor Maayan Hilel is Assistant Professor of Instruction and Assistant Director of the Crown Family Center for Jewish and Israel Studies. She is a historian of the modern Middle East, specializing in the cultural and social history of Palestine, the land of Israel. Her research explores the social and cultural history of Jews and Arabs under British rule through the lens of leisure culture, the history of childhood, and intercommunal relations among marginalized social groups, such as women, children, workers, and villagers. And her work is based on archival research in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. Alongside her academic pursuits, she also specializes in guiding binational groups on issues of conflict resolution, human rights, and gender equality. Before I get going, I want to remind you that we have this form where you can fill out by hand your reactions to today's lectures or any of the past lectures if you haven't had a chance. They're right there in the corner on the table along with pens. There's also QR codes running around everywhere where you can fill things out electronically if you prefer. Thank you so much, Maayan, and the floor is yours. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Wendy and David, for your generous introduction. Can you hear me? Yeah. So yes, I'm truly honored and excited to deliver the closing lecture of the Israel and Palestine Joint Speaker Series, and I hope this series marks the beginning of many more fruitful collaborations in the future. So before I start diving into the talk, I have a couple of disclaimers. First, it is nearly impossible to provide a comprehensive overview of the Jews of the Middle East and North Africa before and after Israeli statehood, as indicated in the title, in just 45 minutes or so. Since the history of the before stretches back to the destruction of the first temple, and the history of the after continues to unfold to this very moment. Secondly, the history of Jews and in Muslim and Arab lands is often presented in one of two contrasting narratives, either as a harmonious coexistence or as a tale of constant persecution and misery. However, each of these single narratives is too simplistic. Instead, understanding this history requires examining the specific context and unique historical circumstances of the many different Jewish communities across the region. But again, we cannot delve today into the unique context of each community. So I will try to outline broad and shared trends in the modern history
of Jews in the Middle East and North Africa that are relevant to our series, while highlighting nuances and differences where necessary. Okay, so let's start by asking how and when Jews came to the Middle East and North Africa. So Jewish presence in the Middle East dates back to the 6th century BC, so approximately 2,600 years ago, following the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonian Empire. The arrival of Jews in North Africa was linked to the destruction of the Second Temple of Jerusalem by the Roman Caesar in 70 AD. Subsequently, Jews settled in Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya, establishing thriving communities in these regions. In the 2nd century, the Prophet Muhammad embarked on a mission to spread Islam through military conquest. He and his successors, the caliphs, quickly conquered the Middle East, Caribbean Peninsula, North Africa, and parts of Spain and Portugal, establishing a powerful Muslim empire. This empire spread not only Islam, but also an Arab identity that shaped the cultural world of the new Muslims. So by the 8th, 9th century, the Middle East and North Africa had largely became identified with Arabness, a legacy that endures to this day. So after the Arabization of the region, Jews who had lived there for centuries also underwent Arabization. They adopted the Arabic language, Arab culture, and costumes while maintaining their Jewish religion. Now, another milestone in the settlement of Jews across MENA, Middle East and North Africa, occurred after the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492. Many expelled Jews sought refuge across the Mediterranean world. A significant number joined existing Arabic-speaking Jewish communities within the Ottoman Empire, which allowed them to practice Judaism openly. Now, it is also important to mention here the Pact of Omar, which was formed in the 7th century, but significantly shaped the lives of Jews as well as of Christians until the mid-19th century. So as part of the conquest campaign, led by the second caliph, Omar ibn al-Khattab, in the 7th century, he captured Jerusalem from the Byzantine army. The surrender document of the Christian community's leader in Jerusalem to Omar became the template that shaped the relations between the Muslim authority and Jews and Christians. The terms of this negotiated surrender became the basis of the Pact of Omar, basically a treaty between Ahl al-Kitab, so the people of the book, and the Muslim state. So the pact established the status of Jews and Christians as dhimmis, protected subjects, and outlined the rights and obligations, detailing what they were allowed and prohibited from doing in public spaces. Essentially, the pact stipulated that in exchange for the safeguarding of life and property of the dhimmis and their right to pray freely, they were required to pay a tax, jizya, and accept their status as second-class subjects. Now, the enforcement of the Pact of Omar varied substantially throughout the centuries, from one place to another and from one ruler to another. Now, despite their status as dhimmis, Jews were fully integrated into their respective societies for hundreds of years. They were native Arabic speakers proficient in both Judeo-Arabic, a blend of Arabic, Hebrew, and Aramaic, and the local dialect spoken by the Muslim majority. In some countries, Jews also spoke Turkish, Persian, Ladino, and Hebrew. Also, they shared cultural costumes and social norms with the rest of the local Arab population. They developed deep and enduring relationships with their environment and are instrumental in shaping local and regional cultures. In that sense, we can say that in the pre-modern era, for many Jews, their Arabness was not a question of identity or political orientation, but a lived experience. It encompassed a shared culture and language, albeit with religious differences. In other words, Jews had historically been part of the Arab collective and Arab culture, even if they did not necessarily identify as Arab Jews. So for a long historical period, at least until the rise of Zionism and Arab nationalism, Arabness was not a contested category for Jews. Jewishness and Arabness were not perceived either by Jews or by their environment in oppositional terms. So now let's move forward to the modern era. Okay, so as we shall see later, the 1948 war had a crucial impact on the lives of Mina's Jews, but its consequences intertwined with broader historical processes that have been already underway since the 19th century. The period from the mid-19th century to the first half of the 20th century was a moment of profound accelerated change for the region as a whole, one in which long-standing structures of social organization began to be eroded and new forms of organization, authority, and identity emerged to replace them. During that time, Jews, like the rest of the surrounding population, began to experience processes of modernization. After centuries of being defined as Dhimmis, the Ottomans abolished this status in 1856 as part of the Tanzimat, a series of extensive reforms aimed at strengthening and centralizing the Ottoman Empire. The new law stipulated that all subjects of the empire were now equal citizens, regardless of religion or ethnicity, and were eligible to serve in the state apparatus. So basically, this law transformed the legal status of Jews, enabling them to engage openly and legally in political activities, serve in senior government positions, and more. Now, at the same time, Jews began acquiring education in the new governmental and private schools, leading to upward mobility and further integration into their local societies. Jews also started playing a dominant role in the private sectors due to their pre-existing transnational and local trade networks and connections. Now, another feature of the modernization processes among Middle Eastern Jews was the Nahda, the counter-revival movement that emerged in the Middle East in the second half of the 19th century, also known as the Arab Enlightenment or the Arab Renaissance. The Nahda marked a formative moment in modern Arab identity. It represented a collective search for modern selfhood, a regional effort to reimagine both past and present, undertaken jointly by Christian, Muslim, and Jewish intellectuals. Jewish intellectuals wrote texts in various fields, including literature, philosophy, politics, and theology, and with a broader readership in the region. They viewed participation in the discourse and scholarship of the Nahda as a means for Jewish integration into modern Arab society and actively helped shape this discourse. As scholarly Levy stated, the Nahda produced a language-based regional Arab identity common to all Arabic speakers, while facilitating alliances among like-minded progressive individuals across communal lines. This, according to Levy, enabled Jewish intellectuals to begin imagining themselves as Arab, while now being Arab meant aligning with a religious pluralistic collective. In this sense, being Arab did not come at the expense of being Jewish, but was an additional form of affiliation connected to a shared experience with non-Jews in the emerging public and political sphere. Now, while these processes unfolded mostly in the Middle East, the situation in North Africa at that time was a bit different due to the expansion of European colonialism into the Maghreb, the North Africa, which alienated the Jews from their Muslim neighbors. So the French, who conquered Algeria in 1830, Tunisia in 1881, and Morocco in 1912, saw the local Jews as an important factor in promoting their cause and establishing their hold on these countries. Now, once European penetration began, many Jews felt that they had much to gain from the changing regime. They hoped that the colonial powers would widen economic opportunities and provide them with greater political freedoms. In Algeria, for example, Jews joined the French colonial administration and assisted the French authorities in maintaining and expanding their control. After several decades, in 1870, France granted mass naturalization to Algerian Jews in what became known as the Clunier Decree, making them French citizens overnight. The collective naturalization of Algerian Jews separated them from the rest of the Muslim population and laid the groundwork for intercommunal tensions and confrontations. Now, in Tunisia and Morocco, the French pursued a policy of selective and limited citizenship, with many Jews who sought French citizenship being denied. However, some Jews, particularly from the middle and upper classes, began to adopt the French language and French lifestyles and distance themselves from the local art way of life. It will be clarified, though, that while many Jews willingly accepted French protection, not all Jewish communities abandoned Arab cultural markers. Some segments, mainly among the lower classes, remained Arab in their way of life. Now, the Muslims of the Maghreb, on their part, criticized the Jews for relinquishing their long-standing presence in Islamic territories and viewed them as ungrateful collaborators of colonial powers. In certain areas of Algeria, in Tunisia, in the late 19th century, and in Morocco in the early 20th century, these sentiments culminated in violent riots targeting local Jewish communities. Now, another pivotal factor that significantly influenced MENA's Jews and their interactions with their surrounding environment were the emergence of Zionism and Arab nationalism. In general, it can be said that until after World War II, most Middle Eastern and North African Jews rejected Zionism. Many rabbis, as well as secular intellectuals who function as communal leaders, opposed Zionism at its inception, as they thought it would endanger their communities, especially given the growth of Arab nationalism. Now, what deepened this tendency was the fact that the World Zionist Organization refrained from actively engaging with Jewish communities across the Muslim world and avoided establishing branches there during its initial decades. Additionally, the World Zionist Organization and the Jewish Agency prioritized European Jews in allocating immigration certificates to Palestine even before World War II. This, coupled with the absence of suitable reading materials on Zionism in local languages, fosters sentiments of neglect among MENA's Jews. Also, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, the AIU, headquartered in Paris, posed a significant obstacle to the spread of Zionism in the region. Established in 1860s, the AIU's extensive educational network across the Middle East and North Africa actively opposed Zionism. By the early 20th century, the Alliance operated more than 70 boys' schools and 44 girls' schools in cities like Baghdad, Tangier, Istanbul, Beirut, Cairo, Damascus, and Salonika. The AIU, guided by its philosophy of assimilation into French culture and integration into local societies, actively worked to undermine Zionist activities in these regions. Now, Zionism did succeeded in arousing considerable popular enthusiasm among local Jews in the wake of the Balfour Declaration and the early victory in World War I. In 1917, for example, thousands of Jews gathered in Cairo and Alexandria in support of the Balfour Declaration. The Jews in Tunis celebrated the Allies' victory by marching through the streets in noisy demonstration, waving the Zionist banner. So the first couple of years after the Balfour Declaration were characterized by small waves of Olim, immigrants to Palestine from across the Middle East. However, this enthusiasm died out rather quickly, mainly due to the Jewish upper class's lack of interest in Zionism, the dominance of the Alliance network, and the low priority given to Zionist activity among the local Jewish community by the Zionist movement at the time. Now, in Palestine, on the other hand, as the Zionist movement established seat, Zionist activities significantly expanded in the years following the Balfour Declaration. Interestingly, many local Arab Jews, or Sfaradim, the popular term for the Jews of Palestine, embraced Zionism while seeing themselves as potential mediators between the growing Zionist movement and the local Palestinians. As Eliyahu Yashar, a native Jew from Palestine, later remarked, quote, having been born in Oriental countries, knowing their customs and languages, their mode of life, and their ethics, the Sfaradim are called upon to play a greater role in the establishment of harmony and peace through the Middle Eastern countries. However, the Zionist movement did not allow Sephardi Jews to integrate into key positions within Zionist institutions or decision-making circles. And maybe later in the talk, we will understand why. Many of these Jews who saw themselves as enthusiastic supporters of Zionism criticized the movement for disregarding the potential role in bridging the gap between them and the Arab environment. For instance, Eliyahu Sasson, a Syrian Jew, was actively involved in the Syrian national movement and even served as the chief editor of Al-Hayat, the national journal of Damascus. In 1923, he settled in Palestine and was eager to be involved in the Zionist movement, but to no avail. In 1927, he published a lengthy article in the Arabic newspaper Al-Alam al-Israeli, criticizing the Zionist political leadership. Quote, for 10 years, the Ashkenazi Jews looked at Europe, which confused them with its promises. The Sfaradim looked at them, trying to explain their mistake, but were ignored by the Ashkenazim. It is then that the political leadership is in the hands of Ashkenazi Jews, and that the leaders are foreign to the country's ways, the Arabs, and are not familiar with its language. They should work with us toward a religious understanding with the Christian and Muslims and gain their trust and understanding of our national aspirations. My responsibility for our national revival lies on the shoulders of Sephardi Jews who speak Arabic. Now, meanwhile, across the region, Arab nationalism gained momentum, particularly in the first decade of the 20th century. The dominant narratives of Arab nationalism emphasize the liberation of Arab peoples from Ottoman rule and European colonial oppression. While some Arab national movement drew on Islamic tradition, others advocated for political freedom for all citizens. In certain countries of the Middle East, Jews were actively involved in local national movements more so than in North Africa. In Iran, for example, the Jewish community showed a genuine eagerness for profound integration into the surrounding Arab society, hoping that the newly established Iraqi mandate in 1920-1921 would materialize their desire for citizenship rights. Iraqi Jewish writers and leaders not only affirmed their commitment to Arabism, but also highlighted the ancient roots of Jews in the country, tracing back to the destruction of the First Temple. They underscored that Iraq is the homeland of Jews as much as it's for Arabs. In one of his writings, the Baghdadi writer Shalom Darwish noted, quote, "That identity is not clothing that can be removed like a snakeskin. It was born 2,500 years ago, before the coming of the ancestors of those who call themselves today Iraqi." End quote. Also, the Jewish Iraqi poet Anwar Shaul highlighted his loyalty to Arab culture and his desire to be part of it, as demonstrated in one of his poems from 1936. "Although I take my faith from the religion of Moses, I live under the protection of Muhammad's religion. I take refuge in the tolerance of Islam, and my inspiration is a sublime language of the Quran. I love the nation of Muhammad, although I worship Moses. I shall remain as loyal as El Samuel, whether miserable or blissful, in my beloved Baghdad." Now, similar sentiments were also prominent among Jewish intellectuals in Egypt. In the late 1870s, when Egypt fell under British control, it was a Jewish journalist named Yaakov Sanila who coined the slogan "Egypt for the Egyptians." Sanila, a nationalist activist and playwright, remained a vocal opponent of British colonialism in Egypt until his death in 1912. Now, like many other educated Jews in Egypt, he defined himself as an Arab Jew and persistently advocated Egyptian independence. Now, the cultural and political orientation of the Jewish community in Palestine during the late Ottoman period was not different from that of other Jewish communities in the Middle East. In his award-winning book, Lives in Commons, scholar Menachem Klein stated that, quote, "Before nationalism brutally separated the two words, Arab and Jew, and required the inhabitants of Palestine to count themselves as one or the other, there were people who thought of themselves as Arab Jews, just as today there are American Jews. Arab Jewish identity was a fact of life, something encountered daily by the country's natives. Ideologies did not codify it in a clear-cut way in articles and books, or did not write about it, and no conferences and fundraising drives were held to promote it or to bring it about. Members of some social strata simply lived it." End quote. Now, the years after World War II witnessed a renewed surge of Arab and Jewish nationalism. Although political activities have been sharply mounted everywhere in the Arab world, while the Palestine question returned to the forefront among the issues of primary Arab political concern. The late 1930s and 1940s were characterized by the strengthening of Arab nationalism, the expansion of Jewish Yishuv in Palestine, and the escalating violent conflict between Jews and Arabs there. As these processes intensified, Jews across the Middle East and North Africa were demanded to show their loyalty to either Zionism or Arab nationalism in their respective homelands. In most countries, they were increasingly viewed with suspicion as potential sympathizers of Zionism. Local national movements, for the most part, did not distinguish between Zionism and Judaism in these years, which made it hard for the Jews to navigate the new political order and their identities as Arab Jews. No matter how adamant Jews were in emphasizing their allegiance, radical elements within the national elites dismissed their claims. With these developments, Zionism began to attract more and more support among the region's Jews, especially as a series of anti-Jewish riots broke out in several Arab countries. For example, in June 1941, Orlan riots known as the Statehood erupted against Baghdadi Jews, resulting in the death of more than 170 Jews. Another wave of anti-Jewish violence followed the United Nations vote for the partition of Palestine in places such as Bahrain, Aden, and Syria, where almost all the institutions of the Jewish community were destroyed, and after the Jewish population left. So the escalating conflict in Palestine was of course a major contributing factor to the erosion of Jewish stability in their countries. But it was not the only one. Jews increasingly found themselves in the position of outsiders when the societies around them cultivated nationalisms with a strong ethnic and religious component. So the outbreak of the 1948 war was greatly accelerated this process, further alienating and isolating them from the large societies in which they live. The bigger defeat of the Arab states in the 1948 war against Israel, along with the Nakba and the creation of the Palestinian refugee problem, had far-reaching implications for the relations between Jews and Arabs in the Middle East and North Africa, especially in countries directly involved in the wars such as Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and Lebanon. As the Israeli victory in the war became known, existing popular accusations against Jews of being Zionist supporters translated into violent attacks in several places such as Aden, Aleppo, and Tripoli. Many Jews across the region no longer felt safe in their homelands. So this deteriorating situation, alongside the establishment of Israel as a Jewish state, led to a wave of mass immigration to Israel. However, the Jewish communities of MENA did not empty out overnight. The exodus of Jews was not a monolithic or linear event in the post-1948 period. Instead, it spanned over more than a decade and was driven by a combination of push and pull factors, as well as specific circumstances that varied from one country to another. So let's take a look at a few examples. In Yemen, internal political unrest began between 1948 and 1949, related to the Israeli-Arab War. The local ruler, Imam Yahya, who was considered a protector of the Jews, was assassinated, and a rebellion against the regime ensued, destabilizing the political situation in the country. So this political crisis affected the security and economy of the entire Yemeni population, while the possibility of emigrating to Israel became particularly appealing to the Jews. Furthermore, the news of the establishment of the State of Israel and the Israeli military victory in the war was interpreted by many in the largely religious Yemeni Jewish community as a sign of the beginning of the redemption process. Additionally, the Jewish agency sent agents to proactively encourage immigration to Israel and to manage the operation. Now, in Tunisia and Morocco, the extent of Jewish immigration was directly linked to the continuation of the French protectorate. From the end of World War II until 1956, the year both Morocco and Tunisia gained independence, Jews walked on a tightrope between supporting the Tunisian and Moroccan national movement, which were fighting for independence, and supporting the French colonial regime, with which they had developed cultural, economic, and legal ties. So Jews feared that the end of the French protectorate would demand a dramatic change in their way of life. Additionally, the French authorities tried to restrict Jewish immigration from Morocco and Tunisia out of concern that it would destabilize their control over these countries. So after the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, tensions between Jews and Muslims in Morocco intensified. Jews attempting to leave were seen as traitors, and inflammatory rhetoric against them was published in several local newspapers. A month later, the Jewish population in the border towns of Jeddah and Ujda, which served as transit points from Morocco to Algeria and from there to Israel or France, were attacked. So thousands of Jews were killed, and this accelerated the pace of immigration. So between 1948 and 1951, several thousand Moroccan Jews emigrated to Israel. However, the majority of the Jewish community in Morocco chose to stay and continue the line of life under the French protectorate. Now, as signs grew that the French were preparing to leave, leading up to 1956, the flow of Jews leaving for Israel increased, as we can see here in the figures in the table. Now, Syria and Lebanon closed their borders to Jewish immigration just before the 1950s, making mass immigration from these countries impossible. These countries tried to keep the Jews from living in order not to strengthen the nascent state of Israel. Only a few managed to emigrate illegally and in secret. In fact, after the creation of Israel, the population of the Lebanese Jewish community increased due to the immigration of Iraqi and Syrian Jews to Lebanon. So by 1958, the community that was 5,000 strong in 1948 had grown to 6,000. So this community endured more or less until 1975, when conditions in Lebanon significantly deteriorated with the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War, which lasted 15 years. So during this war, Jewish infrastructures in Beirut was destroyed, compelling most of the Lebanon's remaining Jews to flee. In contrast, Egypt did not impose significant obstacles to Jewish immigration after 1948, as most Jews there were foreign nationals. Egypt aimed to encourage the departure of foreigners to make jobs available for Egyptian citizens, because primarily Jews from social strata who emigrated to Israel in the early 1950s, while Jews from the middle and upper classes remained in Egypt or migrated to Europe and the United States. The exit of Jews from Egypt increased significantly after the outbreak of the Suez Crisis in the fall of 1956. So during this conflict, France, Britain, and Israel launched a military attack against Egyptian leader Jamal Abdel al-Nasser to diminish his influence in the Middle East and regain control over the Suez Canal. So following this crisis, thousands of Jews left Egypt, with more than half of them immigrating to Israel. In Iraq, following the end of the 1948, Jews from the upper classes had to continue their lives there as before, despite the increasingly hostile atmosphere. However, other segments of the Jewish community were less optimistic about the future there. The significant involvement of Jewish intellectuals in communist parties, which opposed the pro-British policies of the Iraqi government, further fueled antagonism against Iraqi Jews as a whole. So between 1948 and 1949, under the banner of fighting Zionism and communism, Iraqi officials began enacting laws discriminating against Jews. At the same time, Zionism became a significant force in Iraqi Jewish life. The number of Zionist emissaries to Iraq increased notably, and young Jewish men began organizing groups to immigrate to Israel. Israel, now functioning as a sovereign entity, could negotiate with the Iraqi government preventing the departure of Iraqi Jews and facilitated their immigration. But immigrating to Israel required, of course, the renunciation of their Iraqi citizenship. So the rich history of Iraqi Jews came to a tragic end with the departure of more than 120,000 Jews from Iraq between 1949 and 1952. This mass exodus marked the end of thousands of years of cultural and social contributions in their native countries. Now, a common factor across nearly all cases of immigration was the Jews were not permitted to take their property with them, both individual and communal properties perceived or confiscated by Arab governments. Now, the Israeli government also played a crucial role in the immigration of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa. Once Israel was officially established and ceasefire agreements were signed between Israel and most Arab states, Israel proactively began to encourage Jewish immigration to preserve the Jewish majority created in Israel in the aftermath of the 1948 war. However, following the extermination of 6 million European Jews in World War II, the Zionist movement, for the first time in its history, turned its attention to other segments of the Jewish diaspora that had been previously neglected, primarily the Jews of North Africa, who then numbered close to 500,000 people. Thus, after 1948, Israeli institutions began vigorously operating to bring Jews from across the Middle East to Israel. Now, once these Jews arrived in Israel, they became entirely cut off from their countries of origin, as these countries were classified as enemy states under Israeli law. So not only they couldn't ever return, but they also couldn't engage in any commercial, cultural, and social relations with their former countries. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the after the post 1948 period. So the mass immigration to Israel was immediately characterized by the division of immigrants into Europeans and non-Europeans. When tens of thousands of Jews arrived in Israel from across the MENA, the young Israeli government categorized them uniformly as Edom HaMizrach, literally the Eastern ethnic communities, or Mizrachim, Easterners. So the Israeli Ashkenazi-dominated establishment immediately perceived the Mizrachim as inferior, plagued by illness, and possessing pre-modern characteristics. The very terms Edom HaMizrach or Mizrachim carried Orientalist cultural prejudice that presented them as coming from a non-European, underdeveloped, backward world. So from 1948 until the wave of 1 million Russian Jews, immigrants that arrived in the 1990s, the Mizrachim made up nearly 50% of Israel's Jewish population. But their Arab origin, Arab culture, and language were perceived as a threat to the identity of the state of Israel, whose founders aimed to establish it as a modern European society. Israeli official institutions, public media, and academia openly expressed fears and anxieties about the potential influence of the Mizrahi newcomers on the future character of the nascent society. Journalist Aryeh Gernblum, for example, spent a few days in the immigrant transit camp, the Ma'abarot, in 1948. He then published a lengthy article in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that tests much of the attitudes of the Ashkenazi elites upon arrival of Jews from North Africa. Quote, "This is an immigration of a race we have not yet known in the country. We're dealing with people whose primitivism is at a peak, whose level of knowledge is one of virtually absolute ignorance, and worse, who have little talents for understanding anything intellectual. Generally, they are only slightly better than the general level of the Arabs, Negroes, and Berbers in these same regions. In any case, they are at even lower level than what we knew with regard to the former Arabs of Eretz Israel. Unlike the Ammonites, these also have any roots in Judaism, as they are totally subordinated to the play of savage and primitive instincts. As with the Africans, you will find card games for money, darkness, and prostitution. Most of them have serious eye, skin, and sexual diseases, not to mention robberies and thefts. Chronic laziness and hatred for work, nothing is said about these social elements." Now, similar views prevailed among government officials. For example, a foreign office memo circulated among diplomatic missions asked them to increase immigration from Western countries in the face of the Eastern danger. Quote, "Maintaining the Yeshuv's cultural level requires a flow of immigration from Western countries and not only from the backward countries of the Orient." End quote. David Ben-Gurion also contributed to shaping the state's views of Mizrachim as an inferior civilization. In 1951, in a Knesset parliament debate on educating the newcomers, he stated, "The Sephardi immigrants are lacking even the most elementary knowledge and without a trace of Jewish Arab human education. We do not want Israelis to become Arabs. We are duly bound to fight against the spirit of the Levant, which corrupts individuals and societies, and preserve the authentic Jewish values as they crystallize in the diaspora, Europe. So such perceptions paved the way to the birth of the melting pot ideology, which was theoretically intended to create a blending of different diaspora characteristics to create a diverse cultural identity. However, in practice, the Mizrahim were required to erase their Arab identity and distinguish themselves from Arabs and Arabness as much as possible. They were encouraged, if not compelled, to abandon their costumes and languages. This was a prerequisite for being accepted as Israeli. So, as the cultural theorist Ella Shohat pointed out in her foundational study, these systematic processes led Mizrahim or Sfaradim to relinquish their Arab characteristics. Sfaradim in Israel were made to feel ashamed on their dark olive skin, of their cultural language, of their music, and even of their traditions of hospitality. Children, trying desperately to conform to an elusive sovereign norm, were made to feel ashamed of their parents and their Arab countries of origin. Since Arabness led only to rejection, many starting internalized the Western perspective and turned into self-hating Sephardim. So this socialization process molded the Mizrahi cultural experience for generations. Now, while this dynamic of the denial and steering away from any Arab attributes continues to shape the cultural and political choices of many Mizrahim in Israel to this day, the past 2 decades have witnessed an increasing trend of cultural reclaiming. A growing chorus of Mizrahi scholars, activists, and artists has begun to protest the derogatory images and discriminatory policies against Mizrahim while reclaiming the Arabic language and renewing cultural ties and affinities with the Middle East and North Africa. In 1999, for instance, the visual artist Meir Gal created an artwork called 9 out of 400, The West and the Rest. In it, as we can see here, is seen holding an Israeli history textbook called The History of the Jewish People in Recent Generations, which only deals with Mina Jewry in 9 out of its 400 pages. Now, after decades of progress and efforts by Mizrahi organizations to demand recognition of the heritage and history of Mina Jews, an official education ministry commission was convened in 2016 to address this demand. The renowned Jewish Moroccan poet, Erez Biton, was chosen to chair this committee, which concluded that the Israeli education system perpetuates and exacerbates cultural discrimination against Mizrahim by excluding the representation from history textbooks. Moreover, the committee emphasized the need for the education system to incorporate and empower the heritage of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa in its curriculum. So this trend of reclaiming has also been manifested in the fields of art, literature, poetry, music, cinema, and more, with an increasing number of artists and musicians defining themselves as Arab Jews. I need to bring one more example. Dudu Kassa, a highly popular Israeli Jewish musician, is the grandson of Daoud el-Kuwaiti. Now, Daoud el-Kuwaiti and his brother, Saad el-Kuwaiti, were 2 of the most influential composers and musicians in modern Iraqi music. And despite immigrating to Israel in the early 50s, their music remains widely known in the Arab world. So in tributes of their legacy, Dudu Kassa, the tribe, established his own ensemble in 2011, named Dudu Kassa and the Kuwaitis. This ensemble has become a cornerstone of Israeli mainstream music, often performing at festivals across the country. So now I would like to show you a short segment from one of these shows.
ألقاك دنياه تبكي فرقك قلبي يضحكني ألقاك دنياه تبكي فرقك ارحمني ولا تهجرني ارحمني ولا تهجرني خليني دايما وياك
James for more than 20 so but you can find it online on YouTube. And with that, I will end my talk. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So we can begin with a Q&A. I think there's a microphone. Let's just raise your hand if I can question.
Okay, then I'll shoot on the ones.
Thank you. That was a wonderful talk. Something about the memory within the Steinberg families of communal relations as they were across the MENA region, and how that contributes to the politicization today.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. So unfortunately, there is not enough, there's not much history or family memories or even personal memoirs from this period. And this is what creates some problems for historians to explore and study the life and culture and history of Jews in the Arab world and in Muslim regions. But usually in informal talks, I can share my own experience as a Mizrahi Jew, and I used to talk from a very young age with my family. So obviously stories are varied from one family to another, from one region to these stories, even the of these people, without their connections and connotations to the current political events, because obviously they have been politicized by the events from during 1948 and after 1948. So I think it requires very deep and serious research, because there's not very research about family memories. Also, it also has to do with the fact that many Jews in the world were illiterate, so they did not document their lives. So everything is really based on oral history or what they remember, and their memories very much are touched by the events. So usually when such stories are being told, when you recorded historians interviews, so we've been told that usually close intercommunal relations in different countries. For example, you know that in there were very close daily relations between the Jewish minority and the Muslim majority in the neighborhood. And the neighborhoods were mixed neighborhoods. So there was, for example, the very custom of Muslims that at the end of the Passover, they would bring the bread or the flour to their Jewish neighbors. And this is basically what taking to the custom of the celebration of the usually being celebrated at the end of the Passover. And this was seeing that my Jews, but also some Jewish to Israel. This is something that really marks the family relations between Jews and outside Muslims or Christians. Yeah.
I thank you for the talk. I was just wondering, what language does the band sing in?
Oh, he sings in Arabic. He speaks Hebrew, his mother tongue is Hebrew, but many, more questions shall I get? So in fact, only 3% of the Israeli Jewish population in Israel speak or read Arabic. So there is like Arabic studies in school, in high school, if you choose to study, you don't have to. So even despite the fact that only 20% of the Jewish population in Israel are from Mizrahi origin, should we speak of it, despite the fact that we put it in the because I just speaking because we were showing the parts and that's something that we assessment in this showing that they imagine themselves in the family from schools across Israel and each mostly studying Catholic. Many things that always finish that it's not only the specific that was probably by the and they start using this language in order to produce their own arts, whether in science, in cinema, in different fields of art. So
Thank you. And the question is, I'm just curious, if the Soviet immigration that you mentioned created like a third kind of Jews, and what were the changes, and if there were parallel changes to
the Soviet Jews?
Of Mizrahi and Soviet, or if they were very different, and how that affects situation today. Thank you.
It's also interesting because in addition to Soviet Russian Jews who arrived in Israel from the years, mainly the 80s and the 90s, there were also a wave of Ethiopian Jews who were immigrated or were brought by the Israeli government to Israel. So this one, on the one hand, was told by Israeli official institution that this is really the real practical manifestation of the policy. But with the Jews there arrived in Israel with professions and the fact that they try it works with very high numbers. Society into Israeli economy and we believe the internal frictions between the newcomers, the Soviet Russian newcomers, and when it's not him, that university was still stuck in the 90s in the same kind of towns, what is called the developed towns, the young children in Israel, with access to education, did not access to employment opportunities, and reservation among the Mizrahi community in Israel attempts to still live in the periphery to have the newcomers to say, well, we came here like a few decades ago, we're still stuck, and look at you, the central of Israel, pretty integrated in different professions. So this is great in Israeli society, even to racism. Russians and the terms of is Russian Jews who arrived in Israel and really suffered from bullying because they felt that they were seen as outside and something, but in general. But at the same time, the immigration of Ethiopian Jews and the Ethiopian Jews kind of they choke the Mizrahi in the very low ranking in capacity. So in terms of things, Jews coming from like at least control the group among Israeli Jews.
I want to jump the line with the government, but, okay, thank you. I'll take the opportunity then. This is phenomenal. Thank you. I was so struck by the quote that you showed from Hilel, about, I'm a Jew by religion, but, live under the protection of Muhammad and all that. And some of the other quotes as well. I jotted down some of the names, but Sasson, in Al Israeli and others. And I was wondering, are the readership for those, so first of all, I assume those were written in Arabic, those sources.
Yeah.
So can we assume then that the readership wasn't only his fellow Jewish inhabitants of, Muslim states, or what will become Muslim states, but also maybe that they're trying to project almost like a wishful thinking about the level of integration that they would like from an Arabic, maybe Muslim readership. In other words, is this a sign of how integrated they were, or maybe a sign of how fearful they were that integration was going away?
Perhaps very much. In fact, the poem by Marshall was of course written in Arabic, like also the previous poem that I read, and all the other quotes, those of both Gauss and Son, but Yeshua was in English. But so he also saw when they wrote in Arabic, so they say the leadership was twofold. Obviously, they're Jewish fellows, they're intellectuals. Then, for example, as a son, he criticizes against leadership, but his own leadership for the most part were currently read in Arabic. So, it was happening in debate. But at the same time, I think, yes, it was also targeted the broader leadership, the leadership of course of the intellectuals, you need to remember that even in the early 20th century and even the 30s, the vast bulk of the Middle Eastern societies, and also in Africa, they were illiterate, so they couldn't really read. So this was a relatively small class of intellectuals who took part in this debate. But Jewish intellectuals or Jewish political activists, in their writings, they always targeted both their fellow Jewish fellows, but also their counterparts, Muslim counterparts, also those who participated in the Nada, and they both saw the Arab Muslim intellectuals want to show them how integrated analysis suggested how it to be in the future, because of course the future was unknown, but then the empire would collapse, and then World War I, or then the situation, the expansion, the expansion predicted, and then the idea was to continue this pattern of integration using the new political development of the time to widen and even deepen this social, political, and cultural integration.